Welcome back to another deep dive. If you are new here, here's the drill. We take a massive stack of articles, research papers, historical texts, basically the stuff that would take you weeks to plow through on your own, and we squeeze it all down into one conversation.
We try. Anyway.
We do our best. We're looking for those nuggets of insight, the aha moments, and really the shortcuts to being the most well-informed person in the room.
It is a pleasure to be back, and today we are tackling a beast of a topic. I have to say, the stack you sent over it's substantial.
It is a huge topic. We are diving into the 18th century, and specifically the literature that defined that era. Now, before anyone reaches for the skip button thinking this is going to be a boring lecture about powdered wigs and people bowing to each other in fancy drawing rooms, let me just stop you right there.
Please do.
Yeah.
Because while there were certainly powdered wigs, that is absolutely not the whole story. Not even close.
Exactly. I want to reframe this whole discussion. When I was going through these sources, I kept thinking, this doesn't feel like a history lesson. This feels like we're talking about a teenager.
A teenager? That's an interesting analogy. Tell me more.
Well, think about it. Imagine a teenager. You know that phase where you are trying so hard to be incredibly logical and grown up?
Mm-hmm.
You want everything to make sense. But at the same time, you are full of rebellion, you're experimenting with dangerous new technologies, and your mood swings are absolutely out of control.
That is a surprisingly accurate description of the era we call the long 18th century.
Right. 1 minute you're hyper-rational, writing essays about the scientific method. The next you're into dark Gothic emo stuff in a spooky castle.
Yeah.
It's this awkward, explosive, kind of brilliant adolescence of the modern world.
Historians actually use that term, the long 18th century, for a reason.
Yeah.
The vibe of the era doesn't fit neatly into the calendar. It roughly spans from around 1685 to 1815.
So it bleeds over the edges of the 1700s.
It does. And you are so right about the mood swings. We start in what we call the Age of Reason, or the Enlightenment, where everyone is obsessed with logic, science, and order.
And then, where do we go from there?
Then we move through the birth of the realistic novel, which was a brand new disruptive technology in itself. And by the end, we are in the dark, stormy castles of the Gothic. It's a journey from sunlight to candlelight.
So our mission today is to unpack this stack of sources, to understand how we went from, I guess, polite tea parties to selling children as food, figuratively speaking mostly, and how this era invented the way we tell stories today.
Well, to understand the literature, though, we have to understand the world it was written in. And if you are picturing clean marble statues and polite society, the sources paint a very, very different picture of London.
Yeah, let's talk about the atmosphere, because the London in these texts isn't the London of a romantic comedy. The sources describe it as filthy and precarious.
Precisely. It was a city of extreme contrasts. On one hand, it was becoming the financial capital of the world. Trade was booming. But on the other, it was a place of extreme danger. One of the sources mentions that robbery and murder were, just frequent occurrences.
Not just standard crime. We have these descriptions of lawless bands of young men called Mohawks.
Yes, the Mohawks. They were essentially aristocratic street gangs.
So rich kids causing trouble.
Exactly. Wealthy young men who were bored and entitled and, frankly, very drunk most of the time.
The sources say they would terrorize whole sections of the city. They'd surround people, beat them up, or, and this is the part that got me, put them inside barrels and roll them down hills, just for fun.
It was lawlessness as sport. Horace Walpole, a name we will hear a lot today, wrote in 1751 that one is forced to travel, even at noon, as if one were going to battle.
At noon. So you are walking to get a sandwich for lunch and you need to bring a sword just in case. It's not a metaphor.
That was the reality. And yet, amidst this chaos, this filth, and this violence, you have this incredible explosion of intellectual life. And the hub of that life was the coffee house.
I love this part of the research. The sources describe the coffee house as basically the internet of the 1700s.
That is the perfect analogy. It completely changed how information moved. By the first decade of the 18th century, there were almost 3,000 coffee houses in London.
3,000? That is more than Starbucks. That's a Starbucks on one corner and a Dunkin' on the other, on every single block.
It's an incredible number, but the function was different than a modern cafe. A French traveler at the time noted that for a penny, the price of a dish of coffee, you could sit by the fire for hours.
The penny university, right? That's what they called it.
Exactly. That penny was your admission fee. It was like your internet subscription. Once you were in, you had access to newspapers, pamphlets, newsletters, and most importantly, other people. You can meet business connections, debate politics, or catch up on the latest scandal.
And the sources say it was a great leveler, to some extent. You could have a merchant sitting next to a poet sitting next to a politician.
In theory, yes. If you had a penny, you had a voice. It was a space for public discourse like never before. And just like the internet has different forums or subreddits today, the coffee houses were segmented.
So different vibes for different tribes. You wouldn't go to the wrong one.
Precisely. You had to know where to go. If you wanted to talk about poetry and literature, you went to Will's Coffee House near Covent Garden. That was where the writers hung out, or Dryden held court.
And if you want to talk politics,
You'd head to St. James's. That's where the Whig politicians gathered. If you were a Tory, you'd go to the Cocoa Tree. It was all very specific.
so St. James is kind of like our politics, and Will's is literature.
I think that's a brilliant way to put it. And this environment birthed a new kind of media. Because people were gathering to talk, they needed things to talk about. This is where we see the rise of periodicals like The Tatler and The Spectator, written by Addison and Steele.
The sources describe these as the first influential blogs.
That is a very fair comparison. They were published several times a week, sometimes daily. They were short, easy to read, and they were read by everyone in these coffee houses. But their goal wasn't just to report the news.
Right, they had a mission, a civilizing mission, it seems. They wanted to teach the middle class how to act.
You have to remember, this is a time when a whole new class of people were making money in trade merchants, shopkeepers, early industrialists. They had the cash, but they didn't have the breeding of the old aristocracy. They didn't know the rules of polite society.
So the Spectator was like a lifestyle influencer. Top 10 ways to not look like a peasant at the opera, or how to properly hold a teacup.
In a way, yes, they were shaping the manners of the age. They promoted this idea of polish and reason. They taught people how to have a polite conversation, how to handle a disagreement without pulling out a sword, how to appreciate art.
It was about civilizing the city, trying to smooth out those rough edges we were just talking about.
Exactly. It was an attempt to impose order on the chaos. And that brings us to the first major phase of our deep dive, the age of wit and satire.
Okay, let's unpack wit. Because today, if I say someone is witty, it usually means they are funny at a party, they make good puns. But in the 1700s, wit sounds like it was a weapon.
It was absolutely a weapon. This period is often called the Augustan Age.
Why Augustan? What's the connection to Rome?
The writers at this time felt like they were living in a new golden age, similar to the time of the Emperor Augustus in ancient Rome. They looked back to Roman poets like Virgil and Horace as their models. They were obsessed with order, logic, and nature.
But not nature like a wild forest, right? Not like a national park.
No, not at all. They liked nature methodized. Think of a manicured French garden, everything in its place, geometric hedges, straight lines. They felt that the previous century, with its civil wars and religious fanaticism, had been too chaotic, too emotional. They wanted structure.
And the sources say that the passion of someone like Shakespeare, that wild, messy, overflowing emotion, was kind of looked down upon.
It was seen as a bit barbaric, a little unrefined. It was replaced by something colder, more intellectual. One source describes the vibe as wit of a destructive and unsocial nature.
Destructive and unsocial. That sounds delightful.
It wasn't about deep emotional empathy. It was about intellectual dominance. It was about proving you were smarter and quicker than the other person.
So like a rap battle or a celebrity roast.
A roast is a great way to think about it. It was an era of sick burns, as you might say. If you could cleverly insult your enemy in a perfectly balanced, rhyming, heroic couplet, you were the hero of the coffee house for that day. And the undisputed king of this style was Alexander Pope.
Alexander Pope, the guy who wrote The Rape of the Lock. Now, I have to be honest, when I first heard that title years ago, I thought it was a true crime story. It sounds incredibly violent.
That is the joke. It is the ultimate clickbait title of 1712. It is not a true crime story. It is a poem about a haircut.
A haircut. That's it.
Well, a stolen lock of hair. Pope takes a real-life event, a very petty feud between two rich Catholic families, and he blows it up to epic proportions.
Give us the gossip. What actually happened?
Okay, so there was a young man, a baron, named Lord Petrie, and he was infatuated with a beautiful young woman named Arabella Fermor. At a party, he snuck up behind her with a pair of scissors and snipped off one of her curls.
Without her permission.
Without her permission. She was furious. Her family was furious. The two families, who had been friends, stopped talking to each other. It became this huge social scandal in their little aristocratic circle.
So classic rich people drama.
The definition of it. So Pope's friend John Carroll asked him to write a funny poem about it to sort of make them laugh it off so they could all be friends again. And Pope decides to write a mock heroic poem.
Mock heroic. So he's mocking the style of a hero story, like the Iliad.
Exactly. He takes the style of the great epics, the grand language, the epic battles, the intervention of the gods, and he applies it to a girl getting dressed and playing a game of cards.
So in the Iliad, you have Achilles putting on his armor to go fight Hector. In the Rape of the Lock, you have what?
You have the heroine Belinda sitting at her vanity table.
Oh.
The armoring up is her putting on her makeup and jewelry. The shield is her enormous hoop skirt. The weapon is a hairpin. The whole ritual of getting ready for a party is described as if a knight is preparing for a joust.
And instead of Greek gods coming down from Olympus to meddle in human affairs, Pope gives us sylphs.
This is the machinery the sources talk about. In an epic, you need supernatural forces driving the plot. So Pope invents these tiny, invisible, airy spirits called sylphs. Their entire job is to protect the virtue and vanity of fashionable young women.
So they're like Disney fairies, but they are obsessed with fashion and gossip.
Precisely. They guide her hand to the right card during a game. They make sure her hair falls perfectly. They protect her from getting a stain on her dress. They are the supernatural guardians of triviality.
So by using this massive epic style for something so small, what's he really doing?
He's creating a satire. By comparing a woman's morning routine to a warrior preparing for battle, what is he saying about her world?
He's saying their lives are incredibly superficial. He's saying, you people treat a party like it's the Trojan War.
And he's saying, you treat the loss of a piece of hair with the same gravity as the fall of a civilization. There is a famous line where he talks about the things that make women scream, and he lists everything from a broken teacup to a stained dress right alongside a bigger tragedy. He says, when husbands or when lapdogs breathe their last.
Ouch. He's equating the death of a husband to the death of a dog. That's a sharp jab.
That is the wit. It makes you laugh, but it cuts. However, Pope is what we call a Horatian satirist, named after the Roman poet Horace.
Right, named after Horace. What does that mean for the listener? How does that change the tone?
It means the satire is gentle, it smiles, it's corrective, not destructive. Pope is one of them. He is at the party. He's roasting them, but he wants them to get the joke, see how silly they are being, and improve their manners. He's not trying to tear down the whole system.
Okay, so Pope is the guy roasting you at a dinner party, but you are still friends at the end of the night. But then we have the other heavyweight in the stack, Jonathan Swift. And from the sources, Swift does not seem like he wants to be your friend.
Swift is the master of Juvenalian satire, named after the Roman poet Juvenal. This is bitter, angry, and shocking. His goal isn't to make you smile, it is to make you scream. He wants to shame you into changing.
And the prime example here is A Modest Proposal. I remember reading this in school and just being floored by how dark it is. I couldn't believe what I was reading.
It is a masterpiece of irony.
Yeah.
But to understand it, you have to understand the context. Swift was living in Ireland. And at that time, Ireland was, for all intents and purposes, an English colony being crushed economically.
The sources mention the poverty was rampant, almost unimaginable.
It was a humanitarian disaster. The English trade laws were designed to prevent the Irish from selling their goods, especially wool, on the open market. The Catholic population was destitute, people were literally starving in the streets, and the English landlords. They were largely absentees, they lived in London, collected their rents, and completely ignored the misery they were causing.
So Swift is furious. He sees the suffering every day. He's tried writing serious proposals, right?
He has. He'd written pamphlets and essays begging the English to change their trade laws. He had begged the Irish to boycott English goods and use their own. No one listened. So he decided to write a pamphlet. But he doesn't write it as Jonathan Swift, angry priest. No. He adopts a persona. He writes as a calm, rational, helpful economist, a modern social planner, a bureaucrat.
He starts with the data, right? It's all very cold and scientific. He sounds like he's writing a government report.
He looks at the problem. Too many poor children, not enough food. He calculates the number of couples who are breeders. He subtracts the number of miscarriages. He trains human beings purely as livestock data, as numbers on a spreadsheet.
And then, after all this calm setup, he drops the proposal. He says he's found a solution that is fair, cheap, and easy.
He proposes that the children of the poor, at the age of 1 year, be sold to the rich as food.
Eating the babies.
Specifically selling them as a delicacy for the landlord's table.
It is so dark. The source quotes him saying, "I have been assured by a very knowing American of my acquaintance in London that a young, healthy child, well-nourished, is at a year old a most delicious, nourishing, and wholesome food."
And he goes into excruciating detail. He discusses whether they are better stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled. He calculates the price per pound. He even suggests that the skin could make admirable gloves for ladies and summer boots for fine gentlemen.
That is just horrifying. Why go that far? Why make it so grotesque? It's not just a suggestion, it's a full business plan.
Because he had tried the nice way. He had tried being reasonable. No one listened. So he decided to hold up a mirror to the English reason.
He's using their own logic against them, their own economic language.
Exactly. He is saying, you claim to be rational, you claim to be efficient. Well, look at what you are doing. You are already devouring these people economically. You are starving them to death to pay your rents.
Yeah.
Why not just go the final logical step and physically eat them? It would be more efficient.
So if Pope is a Marvel movie making fun of a celebrity, Swift is a horror movie showing you the monster in the basement to make you change the locks.
Precisely. He uses that calm, logical voice of the Enlightenment to show that reason without empathy, without morality, leads to monstrosity.
So we have the wits and the satirists roasting society from the top down. It's all very intellectual. But then something new comes along, a new technology of storytelling.
The novel. The novel. The word literally comes from the French nouvelle, meaning new. And it really was new. Before this, the dominant form of long fiction was the romance.
Romances were the fantasy stuff, the old-timey stories.
Yes. Tales of knights, kings, dragons, magic, damsels in distress. They were set in the distant past, or in completely made-up lands. They were escapism.
But the sources say the rise of the middle class changed everything. Literacy was spreading.
Absolutely. The middle-class merchants, manufacturers, shopkeepers were becoming literate and wealthy. And they were pragmatic people. They lived in the here and now. They didn't want to read about knights fighting dragons. They wanted to read about people like themselves. They wanted realism.
They wanted to see their own lives, their own struggles with money and society reflected in a story. And the guy who cracked the code for this was Daniel Defoe with Robinson Crusoe.
Defoe was such a fascinating character. He was a spy, a journalist, a businessman, a tile maker. He had been in prison for debt. He knew the gritty side of life, the reality of profit and loss.
And the sources say he essentially invented fake news to sell a book.
In a way, he did. When Robinson Crusoe came out in 1719, it didn't say a novel by Daniel Defoe on the cover. It said, written by himself. The preface claimed it was a true account, a journal found after a real shipwreck.
So it's like based on a true story movie, but he is insisting the actor is the real guy and this is actual footage.
He used a technique that critics now call formal realism. He used his skills as a journalist to sell the lie. If you read Robinson Crusoe, it is full of mundane, almost boring details.
Biscuit counting, I remember that. He's always taking inventory.
In a romance, the hero says, I shall slay the beast with my magic sword. In Crusoe, the hero says, I have 3 biscuits left. I have 2 saws, an axe, and a hammer. I planted my barley on the 10th of October. He gives you dates, times, lists of supplies.
Why does that matter? Why do I care about his inventory list?
Because that is what a real person would do. If you were stuck on an island, you would count your food. You would track the days. By including these boring, gritty, factual-sounding details, Defoe makes the extraordinary story of survival feel undeniably true.
It's the original survival blog. Day 400. Still stuck on island. Found a goat. Here's my 5-step plan for domesticating it.
That's it. It established the blueprint for the novel. Ordinary people dealing with physical reality in a timeline that feels factual. It blurred the line between fact and fiction so effectively that many early readers believed Crusoe was a real person giving a true account.
Okay, so Defoe gives us the adventure survival blog, but then the novel takes a turn towards the psychological, the internal. And this leads to what looks like a massive celebrity feud between 2 authors, Samuel Richardson and Henry Fielding.
This is one of the great rivalries of literature. It is like the Beatles versus Stones or Tupac versus Biggie, but with, quills and ink pots.
Let's introduce the players. First, Samuel Richardson. Who was this guy?
Richardson was a printer. He was a very moral, upright, middle-class man. And he wasn't trying to write a novel initially. He was commissioned to write a book of sample letters to teach people, particularly young women, how to write politely for various situations.
And he accidentally wrote a bestseller.
Well, he got an idea. He realized he could tell a story through the letters. And that story became Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded.
What's the plot?
It is about a young, very beautiful servant girl named Pamela. Her mistress dies, and the son, a wealthy squire named Mr. B, inherits the house and becomes obsessed with her. He stalks her, he kidnaps her, he locks her in his country estate, and he tries to force himself on her repeatedly.
That sounds like a horror story to a modern reader.
To modern eyes, it is very disturbing. Mr. B's behavior is appalling. But the hook for the 18th century reader was that Pamela resists. She defends her virtue, her chastity, at all costs, with letters, arguments, and even fainting spells.
And eventually, Mr. B is so impressed by her constantly refusing him that he has a change of heart and marries her. Virtue rewarded.
Exactly. But the format was the key. It was an epistolary novel. It was written entirely in letters from Pamela to her parents.
The source compares this to reading someone's leaked text messages or their private DMs.
It is writing to the moment. You get her immediate panicked reaction just after an assault or an argument. It created an incredibly intimate, almost claustrophobic connection with the reader. You feel like you are right there inside her head.
And the sources say it was a massive cultural phenomenon.
Huge. It was the Harry Potter of its day. It was the first multimedia franchise. There were Pamela fans, Pamela teacups, Pamela playing cards. In one village, the local people were so invested that the church bells rang when they got the final installment and found out the characters got married. They treated her like a real celebrity.
But not everyone bought it. Enter Henry Fielding.
Henry Fielding. He was an aristocrat, a magistrate, a playwright, a man of the world. He read Pamela and he hated it, absolutely despised it.
He thought it was fake. What was his problem with it?
He thought the virtue was transactional. He believed Pamela wasn't this innocent, pure girl. He saw her as a calculating schemer. In his view, she was withholding sex to manipulate a rich man into marriage. He saw it as a business transaction disguised as morality.
So he wrote a diss track.
He wrote a brilliant, nasty little parody called Shamla. Note the name change, sham meaning fake. In his version, she's a conniving social climber who fakes her shyness to trap the squire, whom he renames Squire Booby.
That is petty. I love it.
But then he went further and wrote a full-length novel, Joseph Andrews. In this book, Joseph is supposedly Pamela's brother.
He writes a spin-off of the book he hates. That's next-level trolling.
It is, and he flips the gender dynamics completely. Joseph is a handsome, virtuous young footman, and his female employer, the wealthy Lady Booby, is aggressively trying to seduce him.
Lady Booby, he really wasn't going for subtlety with these names.
Fielding was rarely subtle, but the point was sharp. When Joseph resists Lady Booby to protect his virtue and his chastity, he looks ridiculous to the other characters. Society mocks him for it.
Ah, so Fielding is exposing the double standard. If a woman protects her virtue, she's a saint and gets rewarded with marriage. If a man does it, he's a joke.
Precisely. Fielding wanted to show that true virtue shouldn't just be about chastity. It should be about active goodness, charity, and kindness to your fellow man. This rivalry really helped define what a novel could be. Richardson gave us the psychological depth, the intimate, inside-the-head perspective. Fielding gave us the social panorama, the broad comedy, the action, and the sharp critique of society.
So the novel is taking off, becoming this huge cultural force. But the English language itself was still kind of the Wild West. Spelling was optional, definitions were vague, someone needed to come in and be the sheriff of English.
And that sheriff was Samuel Johnson, Dr. Johnson.
The heavyweight of prose. This guy wrote the dictionary, single-handedly, basically.
With a few assistants to copy out quotes, yes, but essentially it was his singular mind that organized and defined the language. Before Johnson, English was chaos. The French had an entire academy, 40 immortals, to regulate their language. England just had Johnson.
It took him 9 years, right? An unbelievable amount of work.
9 years of solitary labor. He defined over 40,000 words. He found 114,000 quotes from the best English authors to illustrate their meanings. It was a heroic feat of scholarship.
But the sources talk a lot about his writing style beyond the dictionary. They call it Johnsonese. And it wasn't always a compliment.
No, it wasn't. His critics called him lexiphanes, the phrase monger. Johnson didn't just define words. He shaped how literary English sounded. He loved words derived from Latin. He loved balance and parallelism. He loved big, complex sentences and big, heavy words.
Give us an example. What does Johnsonese sound like?
Well, he wouldn't say the net is tangled. He would say something like this reticulated decusation with interstices between the intersections.
Wow. Okay. That is heavy. That is a workout for your brain.
There's a great quote from the poet Oliver Goldsmith, who was a friend of his. He said to Johnson, "If you were to make little fishes talk, they would talk like whales."
That captures it perfectly. So why did he write like that? Was he just showing off?
That was the criticism. But Johnson's defense was that his thoughts were big. He was writing about morality, mortality, the human condition. He needed big words to carry the weight of his big ideas.
I like the analogy of architecture here. If a normal sentence is a cozy cottage, a Johnson sentence is a massive Baroque cathedral.
That's a great way to see it. It is heavy, structured, imposing, and built to last. It has weight. And while critics at the time complained it was too pompous, it revolutionized English prose. It gave it a dignity and a seriousness it hadn't always had. It moved English away from the clownish language of the past and proved it could be just as philosophical and profound as Latin or Greek.
So we've had the Age of Reason, the satirists, the realists. Everything is lit by the sunlight of logic and the clear-eyed observation of society. But then the lights go out.
We enter the Gothic.
This is such a huge vibe shift. The sources call it the move from the Age of Reason to the Age of Terror. Why? What happened? Did people just get bored of being logical?
Partly, yes. I think there's a sense that you cannot live on logic alone. Humans need mystery, emotion, fear. But there was also a key philosophical shift. An Irish philosopher named Edmund Burke wrote a famous treatise on the sublime.
The sublime, this is a key concept in the stack. How is it different from just beautiful? They sound similar.
Burke drew a sharp distinction. He argued that beauty is what is small, smooth, pleasing, and harmonious, like a flower or a perfectly balanced poem by Pope. It makes you feel calm and happy. But the sublime is what is vast, obscure, powerful, and terrifying.
The source uses the cliff analogy, which I found really helpful.
It's the perfect one. Standing at the edge of a cliff during a thunderstorm, looking down at the crashing waves as the wind howls, that is sublime. You feel small. You feel a sense of delightful horror. You are safe, but you are witnessing something that could destroy you in an instant.
And writers started trying to bottle that feeling. They wanted to write books that gave you that same adrenaline rush, that delightful horror.
The first one out of the gate was Horace Walpole with the Castle of Otranto in 1764.
The prototype.
Walpole was this eccentric, wealthy aristocrat. He actually built a fake Gothic castle for himself called Strawberry Hill. He had a nightmare one night about a giant armored hand appearing in his castle, and he sat down and wrote a novel about it in a few weeks.
Anders used the fake manuscript trick again, just like Defoe.
He did. He pretended it was a translation of an ancient Italian text he had discovered. It gave it this spooky, mysterious authenticity.
But looking back, Otranto is a bit goofy, isn't it?
It hasn't aged well. The machinery is clunky. There's a giant helmet that falls from the sky and crushes a guy on his wedding day. A statue's nose bleeds. A portrait comes to life and walks out of its frame. It feels like a bad B-movie with cheap special effects.
It was too silly to be truly scary. It's more startling than terrifying.
But then came Anne Radcliffe. She is the queen of terror. She read Otranto and figured out how to make it psychologically effective.
The sources make a really important distinction here between terror and horror.
This is crucial to understanding the Gothic. Radcliffe deals in terror. Terror is the anticipation of the bad thing. It's the dread. It's the creaking door, the shadow on the wall, the feeling that you are being watched. It expands the soul. It makes you hyper-aware.
So it's a psychological thriller. The fear is in your head.
Exactly. And she used a technique that critics call the explained supernatural,
which I call the Scooby-Doo style of writing.
It fits perfectly. In her books, like The Mysteries of Udolpho, all sorts of spooky, seemingly supernatural things happen. Ghostly voices are heard through the walls, curtains move on their own, a mysterious figure is seen on the battlements. But in the end, there is always a rational explanation.
And I would have gone away with it too if it weren't for you meddling kids.
It's exactly that. The ghost was a smuggler hiding in secret passages. The voice was a trick using a speaking tube. The moving curtain was just the wind.
So she gives you the thrill of the ghost, but lets you keep your Enlightenment reason card because it turns out to be science or logic in the end. It's the perfect compromise.
It is. She blends the Gothic with the picturesque, these long, beautiful descriptions of landscapes that heal the soul. Her heroines are always smart and rational, but they are constantly trapped by evil, greedy men in enormous crumbling castles.
But then Matthew Lewis enters the chat, and he is not interested in Scooby-Doo or rational explanations.
Matthew Lewis wrote The Monk when he was only 19, and he represents horror. If terror is the anticipation, horror is the realization. It is the bloods, the gore, the revulsion. It's seeing the monster up close.
This book sounds wild. We have a monk, Ambrosio, who starts out as a celebrity preacher in Madrid.
He's the most famous preacher in the city. He's revered as a saint, but secretly he is deeply vain and proud. He thinks he is too holy to fall to temptation. And of course, That pride makes him the perfect target for the devil. The book is a catalog of transgression. It's full of incest, matricide, rape, demons, and mob violence.
The mob violence part stood out in the sources, its connection to the real world.
Yes. Remember, The Monk was published in 1796. The French Revolution had happened, and it turned into the terror, the political kind. Mobs were literally tearing down convents and castles in France. Lewis puts that terrifying, chaotic energy on the page when a mob storms a convent.
So if Radcliffe is Hitchcock, all suspense and atmosphere, Lewis is a modern slasher film, all shock and gore.
Correct. He creates a world where there is no rational explanation at the end. The devil is real. The monk really does make a deal with him. The supernatural is not explained away. It shocks society. It was the video nasty of its day. People were horrified and they couldn't stop reading it.
Now, we can't talk about these novels, especially the Gothic ones, without talking about who was reading them and who they were for.
Women. The rise of the novel is inextricably linked to the history of women, both as writers and primarily as readers.
The sources mentioned that these weren't just entertainment. They were almost like manuals on how to be or arguments about how women should be.
Exactly. The debate on female education was raging at this time, and these novels were part of that debate. You have a writer like Anne Radcliffe, whose heroines, like Adeline, are educated and rational. They read, they think, and they survive because they can analyze their situation.
And then you have the monk as a kind of cautionary tale.
Yes. The heroine in The Monk, Antonia, is raised to be completely innocent, which means she's kept ignorant of the world. And what happens? She's easily victimized because she can't recognize evil when she sees it. The book argues that ignorance is not a virtue, it's a danger.
And this leads right to writers like Mary Wollstonecraft.
A hugely important figure. She wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, but she also wrote a novel called Maria, or The Wrongs of Woman.
The Wrongs of Woman, that's a strong title.
She used the Gothic structure, the woman trapped in a castle, as a direct metaphor for marriage laws. She argued that for an 18th century woman, a bad marriage was a Gothic dungeon. You had no legal rights, you couldn't leave, your husband owned your property and your children. She was showing that the Gothic wasn't just a fantasy.
That puts a real-world spin on the damsel in distress. She's not afraid of a ghost. She's afraid of the legal system that has imprisoned her.
Precisely. And then right at the tail end of this period, you have Jane Austen, who comes in and sort of looks at this whole craze and decides to have some fun with it.
With Northanger Abbey, which is a parody of the Gothic, right?
It's a gentle, loving parody, but yes, it's a reality check. The heroine, Catherine Morland, is a sweet, naive girl who reads too much Anne Radcliffe. She goes to stay at an old abbey owned by a man named General Tilney. And she convinces herself that the general is a classic Gothic villain, that he's murdered his wife or has her locked in a secret cell somewhere in the abbey.
And he's actually just a grumpy old guy.
He is a grumpy, greedy, unpleasant man. But he is not a murderer. His son, the hero Henry Tilney, finds out what she suspects and gives her this famous, gentle scolding. He says, "Remember the country and the age in which we live."
He's saying, this is England. We have laws. We have roads. We are Christians. People don't just murder their wives in towers anymore. You've been reading too many books.
Exactly. But there is a double edge to Austen's satire. Catherine is wrong about the spectacular Gothic crime of murder, but she is right that the general is a bad man. He kicks her out of the house in the middle of the night alone simply because he finds out she isn't as rich as he thought.
So the real monster isn't a vampire or a ghost. It's class, snobbery, and greed.
Exactly. Austen brings the novel back to social realism, but she acknowledges that the world can still be cruel and terrifying, just in a much more mundane, everyday way.
This journey, from the sharp wit of Pope to the detailed realism of Defoe to the psychological terrors of Radcliffe and the nightmares of Lewis, it all seems to lead somewhere. It built the foundations for what we read now.
It leads to the modern world. Think about the legacy. The Gothic mystery, for example, didn't die. It evolved.
The source mentions the link to detective fiction. How does that work?
Think about the Radcliffean heroine. She is an intelligent, rational woman trapped in a mysterious house, trying to uncover the secrets of the past using her reason. She's looking for clues, trying to figure out what's really going on behind the locked doors.
That's basically a detective. She's the protagonist and the investigator.
It transforms. The heroine running from the monster becomes the detective chasing after the monster. You go from the mysteries of Udolpho to Edgar Allan Poe's C. Auguste Dupin, and then to Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes. The haunted castle becomes the locked room mystery.
So the Gothic heroine is the grandmother of Sherlock Holmes. I love that. I'd never thought of it that way.
And look at the issues they grappled with. Fake news with Defoe, public shaming, and what we might call cancel culture with the satirists. Information overload with Johnson trying to organize the entire language. And the fear of societal collapse in the Gothic, mirroring the French Revolution.
It sounds incredibly, almost uncomfortably familiar.
It does. And that raises the final provocative thought for us today, for you to think about.
Right. We're living in a time of massive information overload, polarizing satire online, and a lot of fear about what's lurking in the dark, politically and socially.
So the question is, are we in a new age of reason, trying to categorize and apply logic our way through the chaos? Or have we moved back into the Gothic? Are we looking at the world and seeing monsters, conspiracies, and the sublime terror of things we can't control?
That is something to think about next time you're scrolling through the coffee house of Twitter or watching a true crime documentary. Are you looking for reason, or are you looking for the delightful horror?
Indeed.
Huge thanks to everyone for listening to this deep dive into the long 18th century.
And if you have the chance, I'd really encourage you to pick up one of these old books. Try Robinson Crusoe or The Monk or even The Rape of the Lock. You might be surprised at how modern and how relevant they feel.
Absolutely. We will see you next time.